Time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Florence Villeminot. This week, we're going to focus on something a little bit different, which is money and a popular way in France for saving it. Now, this is a country that's we're talking about money can be quite taboo, actually.
Absolutely. In fact, talking about money can be more taboo than talking about sex, especially with your friends, weirdly. Now, there is one exception to this rule, and that's when you're talking about savings. Not how much you save, but whether or not you save. And what's interesting is France has traditionally been a nation of savers, much more than, say, in the United States, where households don't hesitate to go into debt. Now, in France, kids learn about saving from a very young age. In fact, there's a very popular children's fable from Jean de La Fontaine that dates back to 1668. It's called La Cigale et la Fourmi, so the cicada, the grasshopper, and the ant. And so once upon a time, there was a grasshopper who spent the summer singing, and then the ant was spending the summer doing much more boring things like saving food for the winter. And when the autumn came around, well, the grasshopper went up to the ant and said, "Can you please give me some food?" And the ant was said, "Well, you should have been saving the whole time." And this mentality, so that was in the fable from 1668, well, it's been around for a very long time.
Puis quand on tombe malade, il faut quand même garder quelque chose, vous savez. Puis en bon normand, hein, on jette pas l'argent à la rue, vous savez.
Parce qu'en cas de coup dur, on est heureux de retrouver cela.
So, Flo, what's behind this tendency that French people have to save more?
Well, there's several factors that could explain this tendency. French people tend to be more risk-averse, for instance, and some people say it has to do with France's Catholic heritage because Catholic culture teaches you not to spend money that you haven't earned. Now, in any case, one of the most popular savings option in France is something called a Livret A, and you can see it here. It's our word du jour. It's essentially a savings product that's offered by banks. Now, Livret A sounds pretty random. If you don't live in France, you probably have never heard of it, but it's actually a very important term, and if you live in France, it's something people tend to talk about.
Now, these days, around 55 million French people have a Livret A. That's the majority, the vast majority of French people. So tell us about when it was set up. What's the history?
So it was established by King Louis XVIII in 1818. So it dates back quite a while. The idea at the time was to encourage poor people to save money. At the time, it was reserved for the bourgeoisie. It wasn't all about philanthropy, though. There was this idea that if poor people save, they'll become a little bit richer and they won't revolt, because remember, France was coming out of the revolution at that time. Now, the funds from the Livret A are held and reinvested through a public financial institution that's called la Caisse des dépôts et des consignations, and that was founded in 1816. Now, initially, that money was actually used to pay back the debts that were incurred during the Napoleonic Wars. But since then, it's been used for general interest products, for instance, projects like building railroad tracks, canals. Once upon a time, it was used to install electricity in rural France. And since 1945, so after the Second World War, it's mostly been used to build social housing and invest in small businesses.
So I opened Livret A for my daughters after they were born. It seems like it's a bit of a rite of passage here for babies in France as well. But I was under the impression that I couldn't have one because I'm not a French citizen yet. But you're telling me that that might not be right. Who can have a Livret A?
Well, there is one condition to have a Livret A, and that is to be a living person. So, Charlie, you very much could open a Livret A. There is no requirement in terms of age, nationality, or tax residency. And I said you had to be a living person, but truthfully, associations can have Livret A's as well. Now, each person can only have one Livret A, and there's actually a limit to how much money you can put on it. Let's take a look. For individuals, it's 22,950 euros. Now, interest is added on to this, so the number can go up. What's interesting is the state guarantees the money on the Livret A and guarantees that you can access it at any time, and that is part of the reason why French people love it so much.
Le livret A, c'est mon épargne de sécurité pour le quotidien, c'est-à-dire si demain ma machine à laver ne marche plus ou si j'ai un pépin avec ma voiture, ce qui m'est arrivé en 2022, j'ai cet argent et j'ai pas besoin d'aller piocher dans mon salaire tous les mois.
So the state guarantees the money on the Livret A, but it also fixes the interest rate.
That's right. Interest that you don't pay taxes on, so that's another advantage. Selling the Livret A here.
Yeah, the French love to not pay taxes.
So what's interesting is the interest rate has been low for a really long time, but let's take a look at what's been happening in recent months. So in January 2020, you can see it was at 0.5%, a historic low, and in February 2023, 3%, the highest rate it's been in 10 years. Now, it's not that the government is being generous. It's because the government fixes the interest rate according to the inflation rate, which was over 5% in 2022. And truthfully, the French were hoping that the government was going to have a little bit of a higher interest rate for the Livret A.
Bon, je pense que c'est pas assez.
Depuis le temps qu'ils nous prennent de l'argent, ils peuvent nous en rendre un peu.
Continuer, on va dire, avec une inflation aussi élevée et un livret A aussi faible, c'est aller vers l'appauvrissement.
So the Livret A isn't entirely without controversy, though. It's been in the spotlight recently because the government has been debating whether or not to use it for a project that has some people raising eyebrows.
That's right. Now, the thing is, with the interest rate going up, more and more people are opening Livret A's or putting more money on it, and so it means that collectively there is a lot of money in the collective pot, so a total of 375 billion euros. And it just so happens that the government wants to build 6 new generation nuclear reactors for an estimated cost of over 50 billion euros. So it sounds perfect, right? But even though a majority of French people tend to have a favorable view of nuclear energy, a lot of people say it's not up to the government to use their savings to pay for it.
Je pense qu'il y a des choses à faire dans les domaines de l'éducation, de la santé, de tout ça, qui paraissent plus prioritaires. Oui.
Je suis surpris que l'État n'ait pas d'autres moyens pour payer ses investissements.
J'ai l'impression qu'il y a des gens qui vont sortir du livret A à cause de ça.
C'est votre cas?
Peut-être, oui.
So a little bit of controversy there for the Livret A, but if you want to be like the ant, do open one.
Not the grasshopper.
Not the grasshopper.
Don't need to die this way. Florence, thank you so much for telling us about the Livret A, and I've got to open my own now. Thank you. Want more French connections? You can tweet your questions to Flo at Flo Villeneuve on Twitter and check out our website, France24.com.